your location and your question, and we will answer as many of those as we can this evening. Now, tonight's presenter is a seasoned educator, guide, former Festival of Science board member, and presenter. He has many stories to share. As a junior high school science teacher, Bryan Bates had his Navajo students learn their culture's constellations. This piqued his own interest in native astronomy. He had his high school class build a full-scale model of Stonehenge with timber from a forest clearing. Later, Bryan created and taught the first college course in archaeoastronomy west of the Mississippi. Bryan has published numerous research articles on native astronomy and was a founding member of the Society for Cultural Astronomy in the American Southwest. He retired as an emeritus professor in 2016 and now continues as a naturalist leading tours. Tonight, Bryan shares his research with us on the Ancestral Hopi calendar with Wupatki National Monument. So now we're going to go to the video.
Hello, I'm Bryan Bates. I've been a career science teacher and as well have studied the astronomy of numerous different cultures and worked as a naturalist. I'm here today to share with you about Hopi astronomy and how to anticipate seasonal changes and their ceremonies. Now, you can see me there on top of one of the ruins at Mesa Verde taking measurements, but that's really about halfway through my research process. Because in order to do good research in cultural astronomy, we first have to go to the library and spend hours looking through the ethnographic records to see what information there is about whether or not a certain culture actually used astronomy to help them understand seasonal change and to plan different survival and ceremonial activities. Secondly, I then set up a research plan, and I have to find out whether or not the people could anticipate certain astronomical events. So here I am measuring an alignment from Akiva back to other sites, trying to determine whether or not you could actually see the anticipated setting of the sun across a certain angle. So that's the on-site research. But then the challenging part is figuring out how the information was used in the culture. And in order to get that, I oftentimes have to go visit with elders of the culture itself, be it Hopi, Navajo, Paiute, whomever. And then I have to go back and look at the ethnographic record again. So we really have to do three different things. Determine if there was information from the culture about their astronomy, if they could actually see what it is that we're anticipating that they were observing in the sky, and then determine how it was used. We'll begin with a little bit of astronomy here, and you can see that we have someone here as an observer in the middle of an east-west line, and the sun, moon, or stars will transit across the sky as the Earth is spinning. Now, the Earth is actually spinning west to east, which makes the movement of the astronomical objects east to west. If we take and now step out and look at the movement of the Earth about the sun, what we find is that the Earth spins on an axis that is tilted relative to the sun, and that causes day and night. During the day, we're looking towards the sun, and then at night, we're looking away from the sun, and that's when we can see the stars, the moon, etc. In addition, the Earth moves about the sun. It orbits around the sun, and with that, we get our seasonal changes as well. Now, keep in mind this pattern, because that circle that you just saw there, the red line, is the blue line in this picture. And what you can see is that in the blue line, we're actually moving at an angle around the sun, and that creates an ellipse, which helps then drive the seasonality. So if we start at the vernal equinox, which is right here, there's the vernal equinox, and what ends up happening is that as we move from March 21st up to let's see, it's going to be the summer solstice clear over here. That's when we have our longest days. Then we come back to the fall equinox, which you have just passed. And we're somewhere in here, we're in it September, and then we'll go down to the winter solstice. And keep in mind that the stars are back here. So everything that's other astronomical sites are away from the sun as we're looking at it. The other thing I want to point out is that you can go halfway between, say, the vernal equinox and the summer solstice. That point is May 1st, and that's called a cross-quarter date. That's a time at which the rate of sun motions change along the horizon changes. So the rate changes, the rate of motion. Secondly, we have August 6th, October 31st, and February 2nd. Those are cross-quarter dates. They're going to come up again. But where are we? Well, this is a map of the Colorado Plateau, and you can see right down here is Flagstaff. And the site that I'm going to take you to today is out at Wupatki, which is to the northeast of Flagstaff. But the Hopi mesas then are a little bit further to the northeast, and they're up on the south end of Black Mesa. This entire region was occupied by numerous different Puebloan cultures, and I've been fortunate to be able to study many of them and to observe and test their astronomy. Now, this is a painting of the Hopi calendar that was made by my good friend Filmer Kiwanyama. And what ends up happening is that at the top here, up at the top, this is the winter solstice. This is the equinox. This is the summer solstice. This is, over here on this side, is the fall equinox. So what happens is that Filmer took two of the chief katsinas, the Ahola and the Ahaha, and he put them into one character, that is this. And those are the ones that are responsible for the winter solstice ceremonies, the ones that are responsible for helping Father Sun move through the sky. We have up here Iatoto, who is one of the chief katsinas, and a katsina is an energy essence of Hopis who have passed away. And so Iatoto transits through time, so we find him not only here in the winter solstice, but also down here near the summer solstice, because he is constantly moving with the sun. We have the dark woman up in the corner. That is a maiden who is preparing food and who teaches the Hopi women how to take care of their crops and prepare food. The black man in the picture here is a social dancer, and then we follow on to the San Francisco peaks, and the rainbow there is the way that the spirits of the katsinas travel to and from the San Francisco peaks. Then we have, at the equinox here, we have the beginning of the Puamuya ceremony, which is the earth renewal ceremony, where the plants are coming back, the days are getting longer, things are beginning to get more spring-like. The eagle is a sacred object in the Hopi way. We also have two katsinas that are looking over the corn, the growth of the corn. We have the woman down here dressed in her wedding robe, so this is a time for weddings. We also have Iatoto, who has come back. Here is the kiva, and of course the ladder going down into the kiva, the Hopi mythology, prophecy rock. We come across here, this is the snake dance, which is performed every other year. There is also the antelope dance. We have the maiden who is sprinkling corn onto the katsinas, onto the dancers, as well as this zigzag line, which is the rain and the lightning. We come up here, this is the Lalakant and the Mumzara. Those are women's ceremonies. In addition, we come up to the Wupatki, which is being led by the one-horn and two-horn societies, and then we continue on to the next year. Now, something I want you to recognize now is that the winters and the summer solstices are primarily the time of men's ceremonies, whereas the equinoxes, the spring and the fall, are primarily women's ceremonies. So in Hopi, time is driven by the moon. They plan everything via the moon, and so you have the different phases of the moon shown here in this sky. But what is it that drives that movement of the moon is that there is the sun, there is the Earth's orbit, which is the circle, and then the wavy pattern, that sine wave pattern going around, is actually the pathway of the moon. So our phases are actually driven by the moon's weaving back and forth across the Earth's pathway through the sky. What is the definition of time in Hopi comes from the muya, or the moons. And so very quickly, I'm going to start with the winter because that's where they begin their year. And so we have the different ceremonies, and they are related to the Solyal, which is bringing the sun back from the winter solstice. It's a positive life. It's preparing for ceremonies. And then you go into the Buwamuya, which is a cleansing ceremony. From winter, we go to spring, and you have the winds. If you've lived here in Flagstaff for a while, you know what I'm talking about. And so essentially, you have your winds, you have to protect the soil, and then you have to wait to plant, because if you plant too early, then you could lose your crop to a late frost. Third, we come across to June to August, or summertime. This is when the crops are growing. This is when the Katsinas will return to the San Francisco peaks and then come back as clouds bringing rain to grow the plants. The plants grow, there's a positive life, and then as we get to September through November, you have the harvest, you have the women's ceremonies, and then we move into the Wupatki and the men's initiation ceremonies. But keep in mind, all of this is relative to the physical movement of the moon, not necessarily a calendar month. Now we go out to Wupatki, and at Wupatki National Monument, there is a site called Kraken Rock, and this is a wall that I surveyed years ago. Now you can see in this wall that there is a center window right there. There is a north window, and then there is a south window that is much more difficult to see. Those windows are all angled at different places so that you see the sun throughout an annual year. This wall is actually what we call a hierophany. Now, if you think of hieroglyph, that means hidden writing. And phanos, or phane, means light. So this is hidden light, and a hierophany is a place at which the light reveals itself. And so what's going to happen is that we're going to see the sun coming through these different windows at different times of the year, marking times that are significant to the water sand clan of the Hopi people. I'm now standing, with this picture, I'm standing on the west side of the wall looking to the east. And I want you to notice how flat that horizon is. And if you have a flat horizon, it's very, very difficult in order to tell where the sun is moving and how fast it's moving, because you don't have any reference structure. So what does the wall do? It provides a reference structure. How does it do it? By these small windows. Now, each of these windows are made of two rocks that go completely through the entire wall, whereas the wall itself will be made up of many different rocks. The openings are between 4 and 5 inches, but the length of that column there is approximately 27 to 30 inches. So your eyes are driven towards a specific point along the horizon. This picture, however, I'm on the east side looking west, and I should have been on the west side looking east. This is a different portal. And what happens here is that you can see that there's a light shadow line. See that light shadow line? And that light shadow line changes every day as the sun migrates along the horizon because of the Earth's orbit about the sun. And in the process, you can use that light shadow line in order to tell when the sun will first appear in the window and when it may be in the center or when it's going to leave the window. Now, I had the good fortune of being able to go out and stay there at the Kraken Rock Ruin overnight to get up and get pictures in the morning. And that was a very interesting event because sleeping or trying to sleep where people used to live is very different from trying to sleep in your home bed. This is sunrise on October 31st and November 2nd because the sun is in the same place along the horizon. Now, what will happen is that the sun will first appear in this corner over here, and then in about 4 or 5 days, it will get to the center, and then it will move outside of the window. But when it's right in the center is about the time of these cross-quarter dates that I spoke of earlier. So October 31st and February 2nd are cross-quarter dates. Secondly, this is the middle window taken with the same camera, the same film, and what ends up happening is that this picture shows the sun at May 1st and August 6th. Again, times in which the sun is at the same location on the horizon. So what's happening now is that these people are marking specific time of the year in order to establish survival activities or possibly ceremonies. Finally, with the first picture I took in a different camera, this is the summer solstice. This is June 21st. But the difference here is that the sun would arrive in the window on this side, and then it would take approximately 12 to 15 days for it to move to the center. And the reason is that as the sun goes through the solstice, its movement, its angle change along the horizon changes very, very slowly. Now, the question is, why is this important? Well, this is a photo that was taken by Edwin Curtis, and I took a picture of it. And it shows activities in the kiva. Kiva is an underground ceremonial chamber where many of the religious or prayer activities, the blessings, occur within Hopi society. So this photo was taken in about 1902, 1904. But it's here to remind me to tell you that cultural astronomy is more about culture than it is about astronomy. It's how do you use the information that you've gathered from your observations. This is the site where the people used to live. This is the actual Kraken Rock ruins. If you've taken a hike with the rangers at Wupatki, you may have been here. But this is where they lived. And then about 1/3 of a mile away is where this calendar wall, the solar calendar wall, actually exists. It's to the south over at Middle Mesa. And there next to where the calendar wall is, I'm now back over at Middle Mesa, is this kiva, which was excavated by Dr. Harold Colton. Dr. Colton was the founder of the museum in northern Arizona. So he did this excavations back in probably the 1930s, 1920s or so. And what he found was different artifacts that convinced him that was a kiva, an underground ceremonial chamber. In researching the site, I saw these two petroglyphs, and this petroglyph stuck out at me because I thought it might be a clan symbol. So I shared it with a number of different Hopi, and they all said, yes, that's the water clan. Well, I then began researching the water clan and found that the cultural responsibilities of the water clan match with the windows that I'm going to talk about next. But What happened was that Dr. Stephen McCloskey at the 5th Oxford International Conference on Cultural Astronomy came up to me and said, "Bryan, good presentation, but that's not the water clan." And so he sent me documentation from an 1890 publication saying that that was a sand clan. And here I had created everything based upon the water clan. Oh my gosh. So I went back to Alexander Stevens' record of his life with the Hopi, and in one sentence in a 1,000-page book, he says the water clan and sand clan merged. So it turns out that Dr. McCloskey and I were both right. But why is that important? If you look at this picture, right here is the south window. That's where the sun comes through on February 2nd. And that's the time at which they announce the beginning of Puwamuya ceremony. And the Puwamuya is the earth renewal ceremony. It's where they will plant beans inside the kiva. They will water them. And because there is a fire, there is both heat and light. And therefore the beans will begin to grow. And as the beans grow, it is an example of the renewal of life, the return of the sun, the beginning of growing food. You don't plant then. You observe and you follow the pattern of nature. Secondly, we come to this window. This is the middle window. And this is the May 1st alignment that I showed you earlier. That's a cross quarters date. And at this time, the air, it's beginning to warm, so the soils are beginning to warm, and now the soils can help facilitate the germination of seeds. This is not the time that you plant, this is the time that you prepare to plant. This north window then is the marker for the summer solstice, or the Neimon ceremony. And what happens is the sun, as I showed you, comes to the middle of the window, but the Hopi wait until the sun moves in the opposite direction, changes its direction. They announce the beginning of the Neimon ceremony, and during the Neimon ceremony, then the Katsinas will return to the San Francisco peaks that you can see in the background. The San Francisco peaks are the place that the spirits of the Katsina will rest and then return to bring rain during our monsoon season. So the Hopis have connected astronomical events with weather changes. Finally, we get to this slide again, and what I failed to tell you was that the Water Sand Clan is involved with each of those activities. They host the Puwamuya ceremony in February. They are planters, and the elders are the first to plant, and then they bring the water to the Neimon ceremony for the summer solstice. That's why they're called the Water Clan. Well, what ends up happening is that this petroglyph right here is their clan marker, but this shadow line comes across beginning in October and then lines up along the side of this petroglyph, but doesn't cross it at the winter solstice. And what I think that is indicating is that within Hopi society, they pass their community and social and religious responsibilities throughout their different societies during the year. So instead of having a ruler for 4 years, as we do, a president or chairman or whatever, what they do is they pass the responsibilities around within the year so that everyone has a role in maintaining the Hopi life way. So I want to thank you for joining me today. And Hopi, I would say kwakwa. If you are a woman, you would say asquali. And so thank you for joining me. And now I'd like for you to do something. I would like for you to go out and begin to look at what's the astronomy of your culture, because I guarantee you it's very fascinating. Have a good day.
Bryan, that was fascinating.
Well, thank you.
So, question to get you started. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you got into cultural astronomy?
The short of two long stories is that when I was teaching at Rough Rock Demonstration School up in Rough Rock on the Navajo Nation, the textbook that I had for astronomy, or the textbook that I had for my junior high science class, had an astronomy chapter that was all about chaps from the Europe. You know, they're all dead European astronomers like Galileo and Copernicus and Tycho Brahe and so forth. And I'm going, what does this have to do with Navajo kids? How does this help them understand?
Mm-hmm.
And so I said to the Navajo principal, what if I have the kids go home and talk to their parents, their grandparents, their elders, and they learn about their own Navajo astronomy? And they said, she said, yes, do it. So the kids went off, started gathering their information. I was helping them with, you know, pulling some things together and so forth, but I didn't really know what was going on. The day that they were supposed to turn their papers in, they all said, no, they're not turning them in. And I went, wait a minute, you know, I have a good relationship with these kids. What's going on? They looked at me and they said, well, you're a Bilagana. This isn't for Bilaganas. This isn't for white folks. This is for us. This is our Navajo heritage. And I just went, oh my gosh. So ended up that the principal came up, collected the papers. She was Navajo. She graded them. I got the names with a score, and I never saw the papers. Well, what happened? Was it piqued my interest in wanting to know what was going on with their astronomy. And so that's where I got started. So it all goes back to working with kids.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if people are watching this now, if you have questions for Bryan, please ask them. One of the things we do with kids when we're teaching them is see if you can stump the scientist. So let's see if we can ask some difficult questions here. Stump our scientist. So the thing that really came up for me when I was watching your video was, how do the people know where to put the wall and where to put the windows?
Oh, that's an excellent question. And you have to remember that the Hopi and many Native Americans, they lived in a very, very different way than we do today. So they were constantly outside. They were constantly watching things happen. And so I think the most simple way of defining this is that if you go to a point and you set a reference marker for yourself, so maybe it's a stack of rocks, and you have one place that you're standing and another place that you're using as your observation point, then you can begin to see the movement of the sun along the horizon at sunrise. Well, that's an important point. And as you watch what's happening, you end up putting rocks at different points in which you see a change in the color of the leaves, as we're seeing now. You're seeing a change in the weather. You're seeing a change in the migration of animals, or you see that it's, you know, that the berries are coming, or the food, the nuts and the some of the foods are coming. So I think the Hopi were watching natural events and then saying that's an important survival event. And we also have some ceremony that goes along with giving thanks for that food. And then they would take those positions. So if you have one position here, and then you have different positions lined up along the horizon, is this making sense to you?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Then you can begin to set those windows at the angle that would then tell you when the sun would be in a certain location. So that process probably takes 2 to 3 years minimum to actually get it accurate.
Yeah. And I suppose would have been depending on some of the ancestral knowledge getting passed down with some of those things too?
Oh, absolutely. The Hopi have, and many native tribes, this is not just limited to Hopi, but they have incredible traditional knowledge. And just this last year, the Society for Cultural Astronomy here in the American Southwest, we actually hosted a conference on traditional knowledge. And I think we need to pay more attention to the knowledge that the Native American people have, because they can help us in many ways with some of the challenges that we face now, such as climate change. And how do we adapt our behavior to better work with the planet Earth?
That makes a lot of sense. So is there, this is one spot that we focused on today. Are there other places where you can see similar calendar walls?
Yes, there are, but they're not necessarily walls. There are all sorts of different features. There are a number of petroglyphs that I've documented. One is down by Stoneman Lake, and that actually marks the women's ceremonies. So for a long time, I was told and I believed that the kivas were only used by men. Well, that turns out to be inaccurate, but it's based upon the fact that all of the ethnographers were men. And so, if the men went and asked the women about questions, what would the women tell them? Oh, just something that was, never mind. But the point I'm getting at is that the ethnographic record doesn't contain a lot of the traditional knowledge of the women, because there weren't very many women ethnographers. Besides that, there are sites at Chaco, several sites at Chaco, Hovenweep. I've documented a few sites there, Mesa Verde. They're all scattered throughout the Southwest. I know of sites at other places, but that would take the rest of the evening to talk about it.
That's okay. No. Actually, we have a question come in from Dan in Flagstaff, who says, are there consistencies or contrasts between the astronomical understanding or interpretations between other native tribes and cultures? So between the different cultures and tribes, are they similar astronomical theories, or are they different?
They mark similar events and similar time periods, but their calendar may be set differently. But what I want you to understand, folks have marked the solstices and the equinoxes for a long period of time. You can go back to Stonehenge. You can even go back to Scotland, almost 5,000 to 8,000 years ago. They were marking events there, some of them older than Stonehenge. And the same is true with in Egypt. There are some sites there in Egypt that were being marked. And so it's very important for us to begin to realize that this is a human phenomenon. That's my phone going off in the background. I don't know how to stop it. So the point I'm getting at is that many of these are, hold on, I'm trying to turn this off. Oh, I'm sorry. At any rate, what ends up happening is that, yes, you're marking the same time periods, but you may be interpreting or using that information in a different manner. Does that make sense to you?
It does. And that was the point that you made, wasn't it? It's more about the culture than the astronomy.
Yes, it is.
So it's a tool, isn't it? It's not, often when we think of science, we think of research to get answers, but this is really a tool to help life progress.
And it's the combination of understanding the natural cycles of the earth, your survival, and then your adaptation in terms of how you address that from a religious or a spiritual perspective. And so it really is, how do you bring things together? And that's what I think a lot of the traditional knowledge does amongst different native peoples.
For sure. Okay, we have a question from Janet. Were catastrophic events, for example, floods, blizzards, earthquakes, droughts, were they attributed or associated with astronomical features?
Not that we're able to determine. And part of the problem is that we don't know exact dates when many of these sites were created. So we'll have a time frame, and we can do that based upon pottery or other archaeological artifacts that we find in association with these sites. But to say that, the wall at the solar calendar wall at Wupatki was associated with a flood, there's really no way that we can make that correlation. And even if we did, it'd be very, very difficult to actually be able to determined that there was causation or relation between the two events.
This one. Can you tell us a little bit more? So you mentioned before you studied petroglyphs and things like that. This was a calendar wall with the windows. Can you tell us about some of the other ways that astronomical markers have been created?
You may be aware of the Fajada Butte at Chaco Canyon. There's a site called the Sun Dagger site, and I was fortunate to do some of the research there on the aspect of the moon. And basically, it's where three large rocks have fallen into place, and it's kind of like these three rocks create two channels. And so behind this, these rocks are leaning up against a wall, a cliff. So how do I demonstrate this? If this is the cliff, then this hand is the rocks. And so now light is coming in between those rocks to create light daggers on the rock. And what happened in Chaco was somebody observed this pattern and then created a spiral that was on the wall in order to mark the times of the summer solstice, where light dagger comes right through the center of the spiral petroglyph, the equinox, in which you have the daggers, you have a new dagger, a second dagger coming in through the second crack. And then at the winter solstice, you have the two daggers of light perfectly framing the spiral petroglyph as my hands are around my head. And so that's one example. There are other places in which we have, light interactions on different spiral petroglyphs are common. And spiral petroglyphs, or I should say the spiral is actually an entopic pattern. That's something that we see in our brain. And it seems to be that all humans see these patterns. But it's a way of having light interact with different petroglyphs. But you also then have some buildings like Casa Rinconada may have been serving as a marker of seasonal time change, but not necessarily a particular event. Does that address your question?
It does, it does. So there's a ton to learn, right?
Oh,
and
and it's so fascinating to begin to understand what ancestral people were able to extract from the natural world and then use for their own survival and for their ceremonial life ways as well.
So I know that scientists have dreams and things they'd like to research. Is there any particular place or tribe or culture that you would like to research? Have you had your dreams?
Oh, gosh. I was able to do some research down in the Maya country, which was absolutely phenomenal. And I've got to learn quite a bit about the Maya, but I would say that's one place I would like to go back and do more research.
Yeah.
The others would be just to have more time to get out and begin to visit these different sites that I'm beginning to know, because it takes 2 years at minimum for me to be documenting a site, because I've got to see the repeating patterns. It's not just enough to go there when you anticipate that there's going to be a significant alignment. You got to go there on times at which there is no alignment, or you don't anticipate an alignment, because you have to mark the pattern. And of course, that's what we do in science. We try to use our data to help us understand patterns in nature. And then from the patterns in nature, we can extrapolate them into different hypotheses, different theories, different mathematical processes. What you're really doing is looking at ancestral science.
For sure. So now you've piqued the interest of all people watching this. Where can we learn more?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I have to put a word in there for the Society for Cultural Astronomy of the American Southwest, and it is scaas.org. And that's one of the societies that I was a founder of, and there's a lot of information there. We have a nominal membership fee, but you get tremendous amount of information about different cultures and different astronomical events. But we're also beginning to look more and more at the context of the science within the culture. It's not just the astronomy. Yeah, that's what we're interested in. But now we're beginning to go, well, wait a minute, how does this fit into understanding when you plant? How does this fit into when you anticipate that the migration will be coming back and so you prepare for hunting? Those are the types of things that I think are crucially important, is to understand the context of the science within the culture. There is also the Oxford International Conferences on Archaeoastronomy, now called Cultural Astronomy. And those come up about every 4 years. The next one is going to be in Argentina, and it's now been delayed because of the COVID epidemic, but that should be coming up within a year. So the Oxford conferences are very, very important as well. There are other organizations, but if you're interested in the Southwest, the scaas.org will be a place to start.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to add and tell us this evening?
I would like for everyone who has watched this program or who may want to share this in some way, go out and begin to look at the astronomy, the science of your ancestors. There are wood hinges in southern Africa. So here we have native Africans who have been building astronomical alignments that are, 4,000, 5,000 years old. Any place you go, India, whatever your culture is, there is incredible traditional knowledge there. And I think one of the things that can really help us begin to work together as a society is that if we begin to understand that the diversity of different perceptions of natural processes actually bring us closer together, not further apart.
Awesome, awesome. I'll definitely be looking into my history for sure.
Wonderful.
For sure.
And then you can educate me.
There you go. There you go. Sharing knowledge. Well, thank you for your time this evening. That was fascinating.
You're most welcome. And I thank everyone who watched the video and who sent questions in. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thanks, Bryan. Have a good night.
All righty. Take care.
See you.